everyone. Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? All right, listen. Coffee, snack, whatever you got. Pillow behind the back, okay? Because you're going to need it. A lot happened. All right, but first, I want to thank every single one of you for your condolences and your kind words. Um, for the passing of my little miss. Okay. She was with us for 18 years and she will be missed. Okay. Um, our little girl, she was a Cairn Terrier. Okay. And she the veterinarian said that the cause was cardiac arrest, and one day she was absolutely fine. She was running around doing her thing, doing the perimeter in the backyard like she always does, walking around the fence line, making sure nothing was going on, like she was a bulldog, 20-pound little Cairn Terrier. And Sunday morning, Sean woke me up at 9 a.m. saying she can't move. And so I got up, I got dressed, I picked her up, and I was, boom, at the emergency vet. And they said, they put her on oxygen right away, and they said, this is cardiac. I said, okay. They said, how old is she? I said, she's 18. They said, you'd never know it by looking at her. They said, you did a real good job with her, Mom. I said, thank you. So we said our goodbyes, and I was nose to nose with her the entire time, and I gave her lots of kisses. And I said, I'll see you later, kid. So I want to thank everybody. You healed my heart. You really did. So, before we get into today's video, my name is Autumn, and on this channel we talk about current events. On my other channel, Autumn's Backyard Garden, we talk about prepping, homesteading, gardening. We do dive into current events a little bit. I have a Patreon, and over there we talk about stuff that we can't talk about here due to YouTube's terms and policies, okay? What we're going to talk about here is a current event, but it's also on the prepping spectrum, okay? Now, yesterday, April 28th, there was massive power outages that struck Spain, Portugal, parts of southern France, Andorra, some reports of disruptions in Belgium. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the causes and the restoration timeline based on available information that I have as of right now, okay? So, what were the causes? Well, the exact cause remains under investigation, but there are several factors that have been cited, okay? Grid disconnection and oscillations. Okay, the Spanish grid operator that's called Red Electrica reported a very strong oscillation in the electrical network, causing Spain's power grid to disconnect from the European system, leading to a collapse of the Iberian Peninsula's electricity network. This was described as an exceptional and extraordinary event. Now, induced atmospheric vibration, Portugal's grid operator, that's called REN, suggested that extreme temperature variations in Spain caused anomalous oscillations in high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration, and this led to synchronization failures across the interconnected European network. Um, some sources are saying potential fire damage. One claimed fire on the Alaric, and that's Alaric mountain in southwestern, France, damaged a high voltage power line, disrupting the European grid and caused a cascade effect. However, this is not consistently confirmed across major reports and remains speculative. Authorities, including Portugal's Prime Minister, European Council President, and the European Commission Vice President, stated that there's no indication of a cyber attack, though Spain's National Security Council was convened to assess all possibilities. The outage highlighted vulnerabilities in Europe's interconnected grid, particularly Spain and Portugal's reliance on limited connections with France. A failure in the Spain France interconnector was noted as a contributing factor, with cascading disconnections of power plants when the grid frequency dropped below 50 Hz. The outage was described as a rare event, potentially 50 to 100 year incident, due to the scale and the rapid spread across the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. So now let's touch on the restoration timeline, okay? So power restoration efforts progressed swiftly but vary by region, all right? So Spain. By early Tuesday, Red Electrico reported that 82% of Spain's power was restored, with 96% of the substations were operational. Full restoration is expected by Tuesday, though some estimates suggested it could take 6 to 10 hours from Monday afternoon, potentially extending to Monday night or early Tuesday. By 10 p.m. on Monday, 62% of the substations were back online, meeting 43.3% of power demand. For Portugal, around 80% of customers had power restored by midnight on Monday, with 424 substations partially connected, supplying 6.2 million customers. Now, full restoration was anticipated within hours, though REN warned that full normalization could take up to a week due to the complexity of rebalancing electricity flows. When it comes to France, the outage in southwestern France, particularly in the Basque country, was brief, lasting just a few minutes. The power fully restored by mid-afternoon on Monday, and France also exported up to 2,000 MW to Spain to add to the recovery. Now, Belgium. Reports of outages in Belgium were mentioned but not detailed, suggesting limited impact compared to the Iberian Peninsula. No specific restoration timeline was provided for Belgium, though. Andorra, residents reported outages, but no specific restoration timeline was detailed. So here's some additional context for you. The outage caused widespread disruption, halting public transportation, grounding flights, and forcing hospitals to rely on generators. Spain declared a state of emergency, and both countries convened emergency meetings. The interconnected nature of the European grid meant that a fault in one region could cascade, exacerbated by Spain and Portugal's reliance on limited interconnections with France and Morocco. While power was largely restored by early Tuesday, disruptions to transport and other services could persist into the week. So, some side notes for you. The information on Belgium's involvement is sparse right now, suggesting it was less severely affected than Spain, Portugal, and France. The fire-related claim lacks corroboration from major resources and should be treated as inconclusive. Some ongoing investigations may clarify the root cause, but there's current data points to a technical grid failure amplified by environmental factors and interconnection issues. So, as someone who is of the prepared mind, my perspective, evaluating whether April 28th power outage across Spain, Portugal, parts of France, Belgium, and Andorra qualifies as a black swan event requires looking at its characteristics through the lens of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's definition. Now, an event that is unpredictable has extreme impact and is rationalized in hindsight. So I'm going to break it down and address the preparedness angle for you. Is this a black swan event? Well, the unpredictability. The outage was caused by a rare combination of factors: grid oscillations, possible induced atmospheric vibration from extreme temperatures, and a potential fire damaging a critical power line, though the latter is unconfirmed. Spanish and Portuguese grid operators described it as an exceptional and extraordinary event, with some calling it a 50 to 100 year incident. While grid failures happen, the scale and the rapid cascade across multiple countries were not anticipated. And Europe's interconnected grid is designed for resilience, but the specific failure of the Spain France interconnector and subsequent synchronization issues were outside typical planning scenarios. From my point of view, the unpredictability aligns with a black swan event, and most preparedness plans focus on localized outages or known risks, not systemic multi country grid collapse triggered by obscure technical and environmental factors. So now let's look at the extreme impact, okay? The outage disrupted millions of lives, halting public transport, grounding flights, forcing hospitals to rely on generators. In Spain, 96% of the substations were initially offline. Portugal saw 80% of customers without power at the peak. Andorra and parts of southwestern France were hit also hard. Belgium experiencing less severe but notable disruptions. Economic and social impacts were significant. Spain declared a state of emergency. Recovery efforts stretched emergency services. Disruptions to water supply, communication, food storage likely exacerbated the situation of unprepared households. So, for those of us who are of the prepared mind, the extreme impact underscores the fragility of interconnected systems. Even at just a few hours without power can cascade into major societal disruptions, especially in urban areas that are reliant on just in time supply chains.
Currently, there is a nationwide blackout. I'm talking about no power, no cell service, no electricity in Spain and Portugal. It's actually kind of crazy. The metro stopped working. All the traffic lights stopped working. I mean, literally everything. Nothing's working.
So, the hindsight rationalization. Authorities and grid operators are already framing the event as a rare but explainable failure of interconnections, with investigations pointing to grid vulnerabilities and environmental triggers. This fights, or not fights, it fits. Yeah, it fits the black swan pattern where post event analyses make the incident seem less random. And those of us that are of the prepared mind might argue that while the specific trigger was unique, the broader risk of grid failure is known. However, the scale and cross border nature of this event were not widely anticipated, even by those who prepare for outages. So, the verdict. In my honest opinion, this outage leans toward a black swan event due to its unpredictability and massive multi country impact. Though it's not a perfect fit, the interconnected grid and the vulnerabilities were known to experts, but the specific combination of factors and the speed of the cascade were outliers. For those of us who are preppers, homesteaders, the event's rarity and the public's lack of readiness highlight why it feels like a black swan in practical terms. Even if grid operators might call it a gray swan, it's rare but a conceivable risk. So, preparedness perspective. Why were they unprepared? Not everybody lives the way that we do, but the outage exposed a lack of individual and systematic preparedness, which we would see as a critical lesson. The outage lasted hours to a day in most areas, right? Yet the immediate chaos, transport shutdowns, hospital strain, communication failures, shows even just brief outages can paralyze modern societies. Most residents in these countries rely on grid-dependent systems without backup. Now, we would note that the absence of personal generators, stored water, non-perishable food, which could have mitigated the impact. Unlike natural disasters with warnings, this outage struck without notice. Now, we often plan for no warning scenarios, right? But the general public does not, as evidenced by reports of panic and disorientation. Now, the interconnected European grid, while efficient, has single points of failure. We would argue that centralized systems are inherently fragile, a point validated by this event. So, this event reinforces core prepper principles. Households need at least 72 hours of water, 1 gallon per person per day, non-perishable food, power alternatives. A prepper with these would have weathered the outages with minimal disruptions. Backup systems, like propane stoves, hand crank radios, they're critical when primary infrastructure fails. The outage showed how quickly communication and transport can collapse. Now, we can often emphasize community networks. Neighbors with shared resources could have pooled generators, food, but the public's lack of coordination left many isolated. Now, the chaos suggests people were psychologically unprepared for sudden disruptions. Now, people like us, we train for adaptability, which mitigates panic. So, why does it feel like a black swan to the public? Well, for the average person, this was a black swan because they didn't expect a multi-country outage from a technical glitch. They lacked the tools or knowledge to cope, amplifying the event's impact. Media and official responses, which framed it as unprecedented, reinforced the perception of a foreseeable disaster. Now, for those of us of the prepared mind, the event might have been seen as a predictable outcome of over-reliance on fragile systems, even if the specific trigger was unusual. Now, the distinction lies in mindset. We assume something will go wrong, while the public just assumes stability. Final thoughts. Calling this a black swan depends on perspective. For the unprepared public, it fits the bill. Shocking, disruptive event that they couldn't have foreseen. For us, it's a reminder that rare events still are within the realm of what ifs, and we plan for them. The outage underscores why we matter and our perspective matters. Society's thin margin for error leaves little room for complacency. Now, Spanish PM Prime Minister Sanchez confirms that power has been restored, like I said. He said thanks to interconnections with France and Morocco. But before I go, if you happen to ever see social media posts like this, please, for the love of God, don't pay attention. Especially if you hear people talking like this. Ciao.
When the blackouts hit, will your bank work? Is your ATM going to work? Will you have food and supplies? Hopefully a roof over your head? Again, I'm telling you to get your money out of the banks. There is either some kind of engineered front by the powers that be to bring down this grid, and or it could be some kind of atmospheric unknown event that the elites like Elon Musk, others, Trump, know about. A cosmic event. It's not like they tell you anyways. They never tell you anything. 2020 was a test run for what you're going to see roll out in 2025. I told you this. You're far too complacent. The worst of the worst is coming. You better get your ass in gear.